Hello and welcome to MalMakes. Today we're painting the ship blasting off in Pikmin 2. This is the full version. If you're interested in the time-lapse, you can click on the card here. Otherwise, let's get started. In Pikmin 2, the spaceship blasts off from the planet and the onions come with, and then the camera kind of follows it up as it goes off screen. Now my canvas isn't tall enough to kind of show all of that, so I'm kind of turning it into this different little scene. I'm going to compress a lot of that gradient so I can see all of those nice colors through the transition, and I'm going to kind of have some of these trees going tall off screen. So what I need to do first is start to figure out where I want to have this foreground go on the canvas, how tall I want the mountains to be in the canvas, and then I can start working with the paint. So I'm just going to grab a chalk pastel and start to sketch in where some of these foreground objects go. My gradient colors are going to go all the way from yellow, kind of into a red, into a violet, into a blue, and then kind of a deeper, darker blue at the top. So I have a lot of colors to get through and not very much canvas. So I'm starting with yellow, and my yellow is primary yellow mixed with just a tiny bit of magenta, just so it's not super lemon colored, it's more of a warm yellow. And then I put some white into it because I don't want it to be too intense at this part of the canvas. So I'm just going to kind of start here at the bottom and kind of paint it upwards and then just kind of blend it into nothing, into blank canvas. And then just making sure that I have everything covered real nice. Because some of this will get repainted in with the mountains, I'm not worrying about painting over these mountain lines because I'll just repaint those in later. And it's nice because on the yellow I can actually see where they are. I don't have to worry about drawing them just from memory and trying to figure out where I had originally planned for them to go. Then I'm just going to go into my next color, which was kind of the pink, and then for that I took some of the magenta and just mixed some titanium white into it, just to make it a little bit pink. And I'm just going to blend this down into the yellow. And I find that sometimes if I do kind of this wiggle motion, just to sort of work some of it down, and then go back and forth to get rid of that, that kind of helps. So I'm going to kind of do the same thing, just bringing the pink down into the yellow so it's orange, and then just kind of blending the pink up into nothing. My next color is just a lighter purple, and I used the magenta to make this, and then I also used a little bit of cyan and then titanium white. It's a bit more on the warm side of purple, so it's a bit more towards the red, which is good because it's going to kind of go in towards the blue as I go up higher. So I'm just going to kind of paint a stripe of it across here, and then blend it down into the red and then up into blank canvas. After the purple, I'm putting down a little bit of cyan with white, and this isn't going to be the final color that goes up here. I'm just starting to get it into blue, so I'm just kind of bringing it up here, and that's just because it mixes really good with the magenta, which is making up the violet. So I'm going to kind of start to fill in this gradient, and then I'm going to use a little bit of ultramarine blue to darken this blue up here. The ultramarine is a lot more transparent than everything else. It's also very bright because everything else has a little bit of titanium white mixed in, but that's kind of why I'm putting it down on top of everything else and blending it down into this. I'm really happy with how these colors look, and I really like the transitions between them and the colors they make. So now I'm just going to take this white chalk pastel and redraw in these mountains here. Just because I can't see like this part. So I'm going to go ahead and fill these back in with the chalk, and then we'll start painting those. To fill in these mountains, I have a little bit of cyan with just a touch of orange in it, and then some white just to kind of tone it down so it's not super bright, and then just to make it a bit lighter. So I'm going to go ahead and kind of edge all of these mountains in, just kind of doing right on that chalk line. And then I'm going to kind of blend it down into nothing. Once I've brought the blue down, I just need to grab some green, and this green is more of a blue-green, and then I toned it down a little bit just like I did the blue with a little bit of kind of a red-orange and then a little bit of white just to brighten it up, just so it wasn't too dark. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of lay the green down along the base here and blend it up into the blue and do another gradient just like I did with the sky. before I move on to any of the foreground objects that are going to be in black, I need to finish the sky and do anything back there. So as the camera pans up, there's some clouds that sit here, some that sit here, and then there's stars all the way at the top. So I am going to be using all of those. I'm going to have some of the clouds down here and then fading into bigger clouds as that happens in perspective. And then I'm just going to have a couple of stars dotting the top of the canvas. Now, even though I've gone ahead and drawn each cloud in, I wanted to make sure I was going to fill them in the way that would look best for this painting, and the way that makes sense, like visually, because I can't just do white fluffy clouds on this painting because that wouldn't work with my color scheme. So in my sketchbook, I was doing a couple little tests, and if you've painted with us before, you'll know that I always kind of work in my sketchbook and I do like color swatches in here and like reminders to myself, you know, that painting 5 paintings ago, I really liked that blue I had. What did I do? And I can go back through my sketchbook. So you can see here I had done the sky that I have here on the canvas, and I even labeled kind of where all of the colors are. So I have like the yellow white, the magenta white, the violet white, and then the ultramarine cyan. So I can kind of see how I made this up and kind of how the transition of color goes. So that was kind of a good thing to have here. And then I was doing a couple little tests with clouds, and then I even did some on top of my sketch just to check colors and see how I liked it. So I ended up going with this cadmium yellow, medium hue, and white, and then there's just like a touch of magenta in it so it's not too lemon colored. And then this is the same thing with more magenta and no white. And this is magenta and white, and then I have Dogzine purple with magenta, and then just a touch of white because the Dogzine purple is super, super dark. Right out of the tube, it's almost so dark it's black, so it's actually really hard to tell it's violet. So that's why I had to add a little bit there. And then over here is basically the same thing but without any of the magenta, so it's a little bit more blue. This is kind of an analogous color scheme, and it's going to kind of be different based on where the cloud is in the sky. So the clouds that are sitting down here closest to my horizon, you can kind of see them here, are going to be more of the orange colors, but as they get closer to the top of the canvas, they're going to have more and more of the violets in. So the clouds down here probably won't have any, and then this Dogzine white where there's no magenta in it, I didn't have any, I forgot to put it back on this paper, so I'll do that once I get to that color. But those are going to kind of be up here. Those are the darker colors, and they're darker so they kind of show up against the sky that I have already. So I'm just going to kind of take a round fluffy brush, maybe like this one, and I'm going to start to paint some of these in. And I'm going to kind of just do like little circles, not these lines that I've drawn. That was just kind of me blocking it in. And then I'm just going to kind of start layering my colors, kind of like this cloud here. You can see this cloud would probably fit good right about here. So that's kind of what I'm going to be doing. And you'll see kind of the transition in the clouds where they're yellower down here and then the more purple up top. So I used that lightest color to fill in this first cloud. Now I'm going to take my next darkest color, which was kind of the more orange color, and just kind of go a little bit on the top just to kind of darken it up a little bit. You can see with these clouds, they kind of look like from the bottom, like the sun's here, and it's just kind of catching them like this. As I move closer, I'm using less of the yellow and more of the darker colors. So like these two have the red, these ones don't, and like this one might start to get some of the purple in it. I'm just going to keep working that as I get closer to the top of the canvas. The clouds are all done, so the next thing I want to do is put just a couple stars in. And I'm just going to kind of go up here with a chalk pastel and just kind of decide where I want them to go. And then I'm going to take my paint marker, and this has Golden High Flow Titanium White in it, and just kind of go back over these spots with it, just drawing little circles. The next thing I need to do is start filling in all the foreground, everything that's going to be black. So if we go to my sketch for a second, you can kind of see my plan for this. I'm going to have some trees where you can see the whole thing, some where they go off the canvas, and then there's a lot of greenery, or silhouettes of greenery at least, down here at the bottom. So what I'm going to do is start by sketching in this line here, this foreground line, and then filling this and everything down in solid black. With all of this done, I can go ahead and start to fill in the details in the black. Now what I'm going to be doing is working general to specific. I'm going to start by doing the general things, the big things, and then paint them in and then kind of see where the gaps are, where it looks like it needs something else. Then I can start to fill in the medium trees, paint those, and then look for even smaller gaps for even smaller trees. So I'm just going to use a chalk pastel like I did before and start to mark in those big trees. Because my brush was so big, I just have some of the same color, just in a liquid form in a pen, and I'm just going to go ahead and kind of touch up some of these finer points with it. I'm working my way to smaller and smaller details. I had used that paint pen to kind of fill in some of these fine points on these branches. Now I've gone ahead and taken the chalk pastel to draw in some more trees to fill in the space. Now I know this one is kind of centered here, but I wanted to make sure it wasn't all like perfect. They're all equal distant, there's equal space. I want it to be like nature did it. So I kind of moved this one over and kind of tilted it. This one's a bit shorter to kind of fill in this space here. This one kind of goes off to the side. So I'm trying to make it look a bit more natural. I'm not trying to have them all stick straight, like the same number of branches, the same number of everything. So I'm just trying to vary it up a little bit, and that's sometimes hard to do. So sometimes I'll catch myself doing that, and then on purpose I'll start to put a few of them different ways. But now I'm going to take some more of this black paint and go ahead and start to fill in these trees. There's two things I can work on next. I can either start putting the foliage on the trees or the greenery along the bottom. And I've decided I'm going to start by doing the greenery along the bottom because I feel a lot more comfortable doing that with these leaf shapes and these kind of little bushes down here. So just like before, I'm going to use my chalk pastel and start to mark those in. Now I also want to hide a ball bulb down here, so I'm thinking I might put him under this tree. So I'm also going to be sketching him in. Then I'm just going to take this paint marker and fill everything in. I really like how the bottom turned out, and I can't erase the chalk yet just because it's still very wet, but in the meantime I can take my chalk pastel and mark in where all the foliage is going to go. Now even though I'm kind of drawing these amoebas up here, I'm not filling them in solid black, so don't let that fool you yet. To fill in the leaves, I did two tests. I was going to see if the marker works better or using the thick paint with a paintbrush works better. So you can see the two tests here. This top one is the paint marker and this bottom one is just a plain paintbrush. And the bottom one is a bit more fuzzy, I guess would be a word you could call it. And the top one is all these perfect little circles. Now based on how big my canvas is and how small this marker is, it's going to take a really long time to fill all of it in. So I decided what I'm going to do is for the base of all the parts where the foliage is, I'm going to be using the brush. And then towards the edge, I can just take a marker and do some of the smaller leaves out there to kind of clean up the edge so it's not so fuzzy and they're a little bit smaller. I'm just taking a brush and some of this black paint and just tapping. And I switched to a bigger brush for this tree because it's closer, so I feel like the leaves should be bigger. So that's why I did that. And I could even go up to a bigger brush if I wanted. but I'm trying to use junky brushes just because when you tap like this, it really kind of breaks the tips of your bristles and it doesn't keep a nice sharp point. So I'm just using an old brush. I don't want to use any of my new nice ones because I like to use those to do kind of the sideways motion because they have a good snap and their bristles are really, really straight. So that's why I'm just using this old one. And I'm just tapping in all of these leaves. And I'm trying to leave a little bit of space so you can still see some of the sky color behind it. I'm not trying to make it solid like the trunks. I'm really happy with how these trees turned out. I tried to vary my mark making just so it wasn't the same for everything. Like this tree here, I used a smaller brush and tried to keep more of the sky showing, but like on this big tree here, I tried to make it a bit more solid where you don't see as much sky. And then on the curved tree right here, I tried to keep the leaves isolated to the branches instead of like doing the whole part of the tree. Now, in doing these leaves, I covered over all of my stars except one. And that's fine. I just want to make sure there's more than one star so it doesn't look out of place. So I'm just going to take my chalk pastel and maybe fill in a couple more stars, but not too many. I'm not 100% sure where I want the spaceship to go with the onions kind of around it. Now, based on the game, it should be in the middle, so I made a mark at 12 inches because this is 24. And then I did kind of a rough copy on paper of the spaceship and cut it out. So I can kind of decide if I like it there, if I maybe want it a little bit higher, or where I want it to go. So I'm just going to use this and kind of move it around to decide if I like it. I couldn't decide if I liked it or not, so what I did is I drew and cut out another onion, and I taped that on too, and I think that really helps, especially given that there's going to be two more on here. They'll kind of help balance out the spaceship. So I took my T-square and marked in two more 12-inch marks right in the middle, so I know where that is. So I'm going to go ahead and take this off, start to draw it, and then I'm going to prime it with a white paint just because there's so much color behind it that it's going to kind of even it out so I can start doing the painting. And then while the primer is drying, I'm going to go ahead and start to draw on the onions and then prime them too. One of my tips for drawing things symmetrically is to draw the line down the center. And then what I was doing is I was kind of roughly sketching in the spaceship and then the blast part, the fireball at the back. And then I was kind of looking at which side looked better and if one side kind of looked a bit cleaner than the other. And that's the side I started to judge it from. So that would be the left side. So I drew the left side and I really liked how it looked. And then I took my ruler and I lined up that center mark with a solid inch mark. So here it's lined up at 5. And then I could go over on the left and see what tick that the line lined up with. And then I could count the same number of ticks this way and made sure that this chalk line lined up with that same mark. That way I knew it was the same distance on both sides of that 5, so it was symmetrical all the way through. Now I'm just going to go ahead and prime it with titanium white paint, and then we'll start drawing the onions. So even though I had this sketch for the onion, it seemed a little bit big, and that's maybe because I didn't cut straight on my lines, but comparing it to the rocket ship, it's really, really huge. So I drew a new one and cut directly on the line, and if I compare it, that feels a lot more like it should. So I also want all three of these to look identical. Now it's easy when I'm drawing one thing, I don't have to copy it and make it look identical to something else. But when I have 3 of these to draw and they should all look the same, so I drew up a tracer for myself. So what I'm going to do is take my tracer, decide where I want it to go, and then go ahead and just kind of go around the edge. Now because it's not directly on the line, it's kind of outside of the line, when I start painting this I need to make sure I don't paint all the way to the chalk line. On top of the white, once it's dry, I use chalk pastel to draw on the detail. Now I'm going to go ahead and work on painting those things. I'm going to leave these for now. I just kind of want to get the spaceship set. And I'm starting with the flame. So with the flame, I have some titanium white. And it's going to kind of be the very, very center here. And then it's going to fade into kind of like a light purplish pink color into a darker purple and then into a darker blue on the edge. So I think I'm going to start with the blue. Just kind of go along the edge here and then fade it into the purple, fade it into the pink, and then fade it into the white in the middle. Moving on to the rest of the ship, I'm going to be doing the red first. So I've taken some of my magenta and mixed just a little bit of white into it so it's slightly pink colored. And now it's going to be my base color for the red parts of the spaceship. So I'm going to start by filling in the cap here. And I'm going to be using a little bit of black to bring some shadow in. The red seems to be very transparent, so what I'm going to do next is start to shade in some of this white. So I'm going to start by putting the regular white down to kind of keep it wet, and I'll be working in sections. I think I'm going to start on this left side first, work on shading that, and then move on to the right side, and then maybe down to some of the fin parts. So I'm going to start by giving it another coat of white, just to kind of fill in and kind of like get it damp so it blends with the shadows. And then I'm going to mix up a light gray and just kind of add a little bit of light gray to shade. With the red dry, I can go ahead and add some value to it, so I'm just going to go ahead and repaint it that slightly pink color, just to fill in any spots that I missed maybe, or to give it a second layer because it was very transparent. And then I can go ahead and add some value just like I was doing with the white. To fill in the bubbles, I think I'm just going to be using the same teal color that I used for the lights down here, and then just kind of doing a little bit more with the value of it. So I'm just going to go ahead and kind of block it in first, and then start to add that value. I gave the onions a second coat of paint because I felt like they were too transparent still, and then I realized I had forgotten to put the speaker on the top of the ship, so I filled that in white, and then I also signed my name in white. I don't like how that looks. I think it's way too bright compared to everything else down here, so I'm thinking I'm either going to take this blue or maybe this green or maybe even this violet and just go back over the top once it's dry. But in the meantime, I need to give these onions a base color, so what I'm going to do is start to block in each of the colors, and they are primary colors, so I thought why not use all of my primary paints. So I'm using straight primary yellow out of the tube for this one, and you can see it's pretty transparent as it is, and that's the thing I don't like about it, but that's why I'm doing this first. So I'm going to block in this color. I'm going to use the primary red for this one and then the primary cyan for this one, and then once those are filled in I can start to do the detail just like I had done with the ship. I went ahead and filled in the speaker using the same grays I had used for like these parts of the rocket, and then I went ahead and did more coats of color on top of these onions, and then I blocked in their petal curlicue things on top. And on this onion I went ahead and did the same thing, except I went ahead and did the value for the flower, and then on the body itself I did the shading, and then I painted in these outcroppings where the legs come out. Now once this is dry I can go ahead and do the design on it, and they all get a design across their bellies, but it needs to be dry before I do that. And then I want to make sure like that's done, all the values done before I do the legs, because I'm kind of concerned about making all the legs the same size and the shape for each of the onions, for each of the 3 legs, and that's 9 legs I have to make sure that are the same. So I want to make sure everything else is done first, so I can kind of focus on that and not worry about jumping around. But this one's almost done, but I'm going to take the same treatment I did here and do it on the red and the yellow. To fill in the pattern on the onion, I'm using my tiniest brush with liquid paint. I have a lot better success painting tiny if I'm using the liquid paint. Now I could use the markers, but they're way too big to paint something this small, so I'm just going to use this super tiny thing to paint. Now I have white, black, and then I mixed up a gray by mixing them together, so I'm just going to go ahead and start painting the stripes and then filling in the triangles. I drew in all the legs, and this is how I did it. I took a ruler and lined it up with the very top of the flower part to kind of make sure I had it straight in line with the rest of the onion, so I could draw a line all the way through. And then I decided about how long I wanted them, which was about here. And then what I did is I kind of figured out where the bend should be, where it comes out and then down. So then I drew that line, and then I measured each, and it was just 3 1/4 for each. They're equal on both sides. And then I just started here and sketched out towards this first line, and once I hit it, I bent it inwards and down, and then I went up towards this middle point where the 2 lines intersect. So that's kind of how all of the legs go, and I went from each of these like outcroppings. The next thing I'm going to do is take my white paint marker and just fill in all of these, because it should be just thick enough for how thick the leg should be. So I'm just going to basically draw a line, and then once I get to the foot, it has a little bit of a foot that goes towards the middle, so it's going to kind of all come towards the center. So I'm just going to go ahead and fill those in, and then I'm going to work on doing the patterns on the yellow and the red. Once the white legs have dried, I'm going to go ahead and fill it in with burnt sienna, just using a little bit of black to bring in some shadows, like up in here and underneath the foot. The last thing I have to do is fill in the smoke, so I took a chalk pastel and went ahead and drew in where I want the smoke to go. And then because I want it to be transparent, I had to do some tests first to make sure I had it set. So in my sketchbook, I used some of the leftover paint from painting the onions and made a little bit of a sky here, just because I want to make sure that this works on top of all the colors and I can still see them through the paint. So all of these different little tests here are just different ways of applying this mix I have. Some of them just use certain parts of it. I've mixed in certain things for others. Like you can see some of them are blue and some aren't. But what I'm going to be doing is this one right here. So there's a little bit of a faint ghost edge on here that's kind of this blue-gray, and then there's a bit more of a pure white down the middle. So I'm going to be doing these 2 layers. Now the first layer is going to be that blue-gray, and I started by using golden fluid, acrylic, and zinc white. Now this is that middle part, so I will be using this plain once I finish doing the blue part, but in order to make the blue I started by using this, and this is kind of a heavy cream consistency, like what you'd pour in your coffee. It's not quite ink like it is in the paint markers like these ones. This is more of an ink consistency. This is the high flow. So the fluid is a bit more thick. I started with that, and then I wanted it to be blue-gray, but I didn't want to thicken up the paint, so I used a high flow in phthalo blue green shade, and then shading gray. So both of these are transparent, so you can really see these bars really well. So they're still helping keep the transparency, but they're also making the paint a little bit more fluid. And then I tried it out, and that's this bluish color over here behind this middle one, and it was way too opaque. I wanted it to be more transparent. So in order to make it more transparent, there's a couple things you can do. If you use water, you'll have to be really careful because sometimes it won't adhere to the other stuff. It kind of just slides off and it'll move around too much. And if it dries, it may flake off. So what I ended up using was this acrylic glazing liquid. And this one I have is satin. It doesn't really matter to me if I'm going to be using matte or satin or gloss, just because when the painting is done, I varnish it in a gloss finish anyway. So all of the inconsistencies with the varnish or the glossiness of it won't matter because I'm just doing a big gloss coat over the top. But this is what I have, so this is what I was using. So I mixed all of those colors, the zinc white, the phthalo blue, and the shading gray, with this acrylic glazing liquid, which is basically the same consistency of the fluid, but it's clear. And then that kind of gave me this little bit over here. You can see it's kind of like ghostly. It's very, very transparent, which is what I'm looking for. So I'm going to take that and go ahead and use a round brush like this one, and kind of just fill this in very carefully inside these chalk lines. Once it dries, and because it is liquid, it needs to dry a little bit longer than some of my heavier paints, then I can take the regular zinc white and kind of do the same thing inside of it, just to make it a bit more opaque in the middle and a bit brighter. And we're done! We have the ship blasting off from Pikmin 2. If you're interested in this piece, you could buy a poster or a phone case or bid on this original canvas. There's links down below. Also, consider supporting me on Patreon. You can find out more at supportmal.com. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes of MalMakes, and I'll see you again here for another video game painting.